Oh boy, here we go. It seemed like such a brilliant idea at the time. The annual candy festival was just on the other side of this giant corn maze. A shortcut. Kevin, ever the leader, puffed out his chest, unrolling a map with the confidence of a seasoned explorer. "Follow me," he chirped, pointing a determined finger. The only tiny problem? The map was completely upside down. But hey,
Yes!
details! To the candy, Stuart, always the cool one, just shrugged and followed along, strumming a little tune on his imaginary ukulele. And then there was Bob. Sweet, innocent Bob, clutching his teddy bear, Tim, with wide wonder. He saw the towering stalks of corn not as an obstacle, but as a jungle gym. "You told?" he squealed, his eyes sparkling. This was going to be an adventure. The path ahead looked easy enough. A straight shot through the golden labyrinth. Or so they thought. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the promise of sugary treats filled the air. What could possibly go wrong? Kevin marched forward, taking decisive turns left and right, occasionally stopping to consult his trusty, albeit inverted, map. Aha! According to this ancient scroll, he'd declare, tapping the paper importantly, "We must proceed. This way." Stuart would peer over his shoulder, squint, and just nod along. It was easier than arguing. Bob, however, was getting a little impatient. The candy wasn't getting any closer, and his little legs were getting tired. "View. I get view," he announced suddenly. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed onto a thick cornstalk, his little arms and legs scrambling for purchase. He shimmied up, higher and higher, like a tiny yellow monkey. "I see! Corn!" he yelled down, which wasn't particularly helpful. He reached the very top, the stalk groaning under his weight. He bounced a little, trying to get a better vantage point. But the cornstalk had other plans. It began to bend, slowly, gracefully, like a fishing rod with a big catch. "Whoa-ho!" Bob yelped as the stalk bent further and further, creating a perfect arc. For a moment, he was suspended in midair, a look of pure surprise on his face. Then, with a gentle asterisk, thwump asterisk, the stalk released him, and he landed softly in a pile of dirt, sputtering and covered in dust. He sat up, blinked, and held up Tim. "We okay?" As they ventured deeper, a strange sense of déjà vu began to creep in. "Hey!" Stuart mumbled, pointing a finger. "That cornstalk. It looks familiar." And it did. It was the very same stalk that had so unceremoniously tossed Bob. It was still bent over, like it was bowing to them. Kevin scoffed. Nonsense. All cornstalks look alike. Onward! He led them on another winding, circuitous route for what felt like an hour. They turned left, then right, then took a path that looped around on itself, and then there was again the same bent cornstalk, mocking them with its droopy posture. Stuart just crossed his arms. Bob waved at it. "Hi, bendy friend!" Kevin stared at his map, utterly bewildered. He turned it around, looked at it sideways, and even tried shaking it, as if the correct route would magically appear. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The golden maze started to look a lot less friendly. Long, creepy shadows stretched across their path, and every little sound was amplified. A gentle breeze rustling the corn leaves sounded like a mysterious whisper. "Shush!" Bob's eyes widened, and he hugged Tim a little tighter. "What the?" he whimpered, pointing into the darkness. Stuart, trying to act brave, peered into the gloom. "Probably just wind," he said, though his voice trembled a bit. Then they heard another sound. A asterisk snap asterisk, like a twig breaking under a heavy foot. All three of them froze, standing shoulder to shoulder, their big eyes scanning the rows of corn. Kevin, trying to reassert his leadership, cleared his throat. "Stay close. I will protect you." he declared, holding up his fists, which weren't very intimidating. They shuffled forward, moving as a single, trembling, yellow unit. The rustling grew louder, closer. It sounded like something was moving with them, keeping pace just beyond the wall of corn. Asterisk Russell! Russell! Step! Step! Asterisk Bob started to whimper, and even Stuart's cool demeanor was cracking. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see a monster with glowing red eyes. The path ahead was getting darker and darker, and their fun little shortcut had turned into a full-blown spooky adventure. They huddled together, every nerve on edge, listening to the mysterious sounds of the maze at night. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the darkness at the end of the path. It was tall, lanky, with arms stretched out wide and a strange, lumpy head. It stood perfectly still, a silent sentinel in the moonlight. Vimarino? Monster! Bob shrieked, diving behind Kevin. Stuart grabbed a hardened piece of corn off the ground, ready to defend himself. Kevin, for all his earlier bravado, looked terrified. He held up his upside-down map like a shield. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, silhouetted against the dim sky. They crept closer, step by cautious step, hearts pounding in their chests. Was this the creature that had been following them? Was this the end? They squinted, their eyes adjusting to the dark. The lumpy head seemed to be made of straw. And was that a flannel shirt? It was a scarecrow. A goofy, harmless scarecrow with a painted-on smile and button eyes. The relief was so immense, they all collapsed into a puddle of giggles. They had been terrified of a glorified stick figure. Stuart tossed his corn weapon aside, and Kevin sheepishly folded his map. Bob, however, saw not a threat, but a new friend. He toddled up to the scarecrow, looking up at its smiling face. It probably looked hungry. Bob reached into his overalls and pulled out his most prized possession, a beautiful, perfectly yellow banana. "Bello," he said, offering it up to the scarecrow's stitched mouth. "Banana." The scarecrow, of course, did not accept the banana. Bob just shrugged and decided to save it for later, patting the scarecrow's straw leg before rejoining his friends. Feeling re-energized by their bout of laughter and the realization that they weren't about to be eaten, they decided to give it one last try. They ignored the map, which had proven utterly useless, and just picked a direction. "That way," Kevin declared, pointing with renewed and completely arbitrary confidence. They walked and walked, past more rows of identical corn, the night growing deeper. They were tired. Their overalls were covered in dirt and bits of corn husk, and the dream of candy was starting to fade. Bob was starting to yawn, and Stuart looked like he was ready to just build a nest and sleep in the maze forever. They were about to give up, to sit down and wait for morning, when they stumbled through one last row of corn and fell out. They tumbled out of the maze and landed in a heap on soft grass. They blinked, disoriented, under the bright lights of the festival. The sounds of music and happy chatter filled the air. They had made it. They were out. They jumped up, cheering and hugging each other. They had conquered the maze. Exhausted but triumphant, they looked around for the grand prize, the mountains of candy they had dreamed of. And there it was. Sitting on a small table right next to the exit was their reward. It wasn't a mountain. It wasn't even a big pile. It was a tiny, almost comically small, clear bag containing exactly 3 pieces of candy corn. They stared at it. All that chaos, all that fear, all that getting lost. For this, Kevin picked up the bag. He looked at Stuart. He looked at Bob. And then they all burst out laughing. It was the silliest adventure ever. Kevin gave one piece to Stuart, one to Bob, and kept one for himself. It was the best tasting candy they had ever had. Thanks for watching our chaotic cornfield adventure! If you had as much fun as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Minion Mayhem. See you next time!